Hi, scholars. In this video, I'm going to conclude my talk about communication apprehension by looking at physical stress. Now, just like with psychological stress, we're first going to look at the symptoms to kind of help us see, is it physical stress that we're experiencing, and then we'll look at the cause and how to reverse it. Now, the symptoms of physical stress, when somebody says, I'm feeling nervous, and you ask them the symptoms, there's a very good chance that these are some of the things they're going to be talking about. Muscle tension, shaking, shallow breathing, the heart rate racing or sometimes pounding. Maybe they'll get dry mouth, feel nausea, butterflies in the tummy. Sometimes they'll get headaches. If you want to get this list of symptoms, go ahead and pause the video and write down any of these that you want to write down. What's more important than knowing specific ones on this list is just recognizing that these are physical manifestations of stress, where before was psychological, it was about thinking. And we got a few more. Reduction in cognition, we begin to not think as clearly. We have difficulty remembering things. We struggle with words, vocabulary. Sometimes our appetite changes. Sometimes people lose their appetite and don't want to eat. Sometimes people get hungrier. They become more irritable, etc. You get the idea. So physical stress is really the physical manifestation of stress within us. Now, the best way to really kind of talk about the cause of all of this is to focus on a little story, or to tell you a little story. Before I do that, though, when you look at this list of physical symptoms, it should tell you that this is a physical condition. I mentioned during the overview video that sometimes when we're feeling stress and we might tell someone, it's like, gosh, I feel really nervous. And they go, why, what's wrong? Oh, I got a big test and I'm just feeling really nervous about it. And they'll say, don't worry about it. You'll do fine. You're smart. People like you, whatever. And then 10 minutes later, they say, what's wrong? I'm feeling nervous and stressed. They said, I told you, don't worry about it. If it's physical stress, that would be like going up to somebody who has, say, the flu and say, don't worry about it, you feel fine, and expecting that to help. So instead, this physical condition has a physical cause, and we need to address and reverse that physical cause. So, I'm going to tell you a little story of physical stress because I think it helps illustrate this cause. You're not going to be tested on this, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay. 4.5 million years ago, when our ancestors roamed the plains of Africa, they weren't actually the predators. See, the earliest humans were actually the prey. Does anybody know who the predators were? Who was our natural enemy? Well, think Africa, and could hunt and kill humans. And immediately, of course, you think about the large cats, and you'd be right. Now, you've all heard that our survival response is fight or flight. In actuality, our survival response is freeze, flight, fight. You see, when a human would notice a large cat nearby, you have the fight or flight crowd. First thing, fight. They turn and attack the cat. Well, the cat's 400 pounds, has big claws, big jaws, killed them, got them out of the gene pool before they bred and became us, thank God. The second group, the flight or fight crowd, were only a little bit smarter. When they saw a large cat, they took off running. Well, in addition to cats being much bigger and having natural weapons, they're also much faster. So they would chase the human down and kill them. The third group, the group that became us, had a very well developed what we call limbic system in their brain. Now, if you don't mind, go ahead and put your hand, let's see if I can get this in the camera right, like this. Put your thumb over your palm and your four fingers over your thumb, assuming that wouldn't exacerbate an injury or something. This is a very, very simple model of your brain. This is the brainstem. From your knuckles forward is called the prefrontal cortex. And that's the part of your brain that is in charge of higher order thinking or executive functions. It's kind of the CEO of your brain. Where your thumb is deep inside the brain is called the limbic system. And the limbic system has a variety of jobs, but its primary job is in survival. The third group that was facing that cat, they had a well-developed limbic system, and that ended up getting passed down to us. The limbic system can short circuit the prefrontal cortex. In other words, turn logic off and go into a survival mode. So they did the least logical thing anybody could think of. Large cat nearby, freeze and do nothing. Now, they probably didn't know this, but cats, like a lot of animals, their vision is actually blurry, except when something moves. When something moves, it becomes crystal clear. It gets attention. So oftentimes the person that froze, the cat would wander off, not even never knowing that they were there. And then the person would walk off. If the cat turned and began to stalk them, in other words, okay, gig's up, the cat sees me, the second thing that this person would do is run. Now, they're not running to try to get away from the cat, because that's not going to happen. Sometimes people say maybe they're looking for a big rock. Well, a boulder to stop a large cat is probably too heavy for this human to pick up and wield real quick and easily. Instead, what this person is oftentimes looking for is another cat. Think about that for a moment. The biggest problem in your world is that there's a giant cat that's about to kill you, and your solution is, let's find another one. Well, if you've ever watched the Animal Channel, you know how this works. If they find another one, the second predator doesn't attack the prey. The second predator attacks the first predator, and they fight over the prey. Meanwhile, the person escapes. If that doesn't work, as a last option, the person turns and attacks the cat and gets killed. Now, this is actually ingrained in us, this freeze, flight, fight. If a child is stealing a cookie from the cookie jar and they don't know mom's right behind them, and mom suddenly says, "Steal it!" What's the kid do? They freeze. Now, we don't stay frozen for long because obviously the gig's up, mom sees us. Then the second thing the child does is escape. They probably don't physically run because mom knows where my room is. We use our words. We use our language. And they go, I wasn't stealing a cookie. So they're trying to escape the situation. I wasn't stealing a cookie. I was counting the cookies. I was just kind of moving the cookies around. I was bringing you a cookie. You want it? Okay. In other words, they're escaping. When that doesn't work, the third thing is fight. Hopefully not trying to hit mom. Instead, once again, we use our language. We use our voice. And they cry and they scream and they try to lay on guilt. I never get a cookie, ever, whatever. Hoping that mom, not wanting to deal with this pain, will finally say, just be quiet and go to your room. And then if that doesn't work, then they get punished. So this freeze, flight, fight. So when we're perceiving danger, when we're perceiving a stressful situation, which could be anything, it could be physical danger, it can also be social danger, like of embarrassment or loss of face, then our limbic system kicks in, and the first thing it does is has the chest muscles tense up. The chest muscles tensing up, now this is the strongest muscle that you have conscious control over. So having that muscle group tense up not only gets it ready for action, but it creates a hardened shell around vital organs that the limbic system knows it needs in order to survive. Now, if we went from relaxed to stressed, we would probably notice that. But we're naturally stressed. I'm going to pull up the symptoms here just to kind of show how this is. So we're on symptom number 1, muscle tension. Okay. So we would notice if we went from relaxed to stressed, but we live stressful lives naturally. So we just go from stressed to more stressed. So when our chest muscles tense up, they constrict around the lungs, making it harder to breathe. But because we're not aware of that, we don't put in more effort to breathe. So our breathing becomes more shallow. Sometimes in really tense situations, people actually forget to breathe. They have to be reminded to breathe. For anybody who does scuba diving, you know that don't die is rule number 2. Rule number 1, remember to breathe. Because when we're in a stressful environment or stressful situation, breathing actually becomes more shallow, and sometimes we actually hold our breath. So we get shallow breathing. Now, when we breathe, we take in oxygen and we expel carbon dioxide. By the way, I apologize, this video is probably going to be one of the longer ones. We expel carbon dioxide. But when our breathing becomes more shallow, the blood comes to the lungs to pick up oxygen, but instead it delivers carbon dioxide to the body. Carbon dioxide is like a toxic gas to our muscles. So when the carbon dioxide is delivered to the muscles begin to cramp, they begin to tense up, and it creates an internal energy. That internal energy has to escape, and the way it escapes is we begin to shake. You might notice that your hands shake more than most of your body. The reason for that is because the muscles in your neck and your shoulders can't escape directly. We don't shake our neck. So the muscles, the tension makes its way down to the extremities and it escapes through our shaking. When this carbon dioxide rich blood reaches the brain realizes we don't have enough oxygen and instructs the heart to beat faster, because that's the way the brain gets more oxygen, is the heart beating faster, so more blood gets to the lungs to deliver more oxygen to the body. So the heart begins to beat faster, but all it does is deliver more blood to the lungs that don't have enough oxygen, and that delivers to the rest of the body, and it just has more carbon dioxide. At this point, the brain realizes this is potentially an existential threat. The existence of the brain is in danger. I have to have oxygen to survive, and the way I know to get oxygen didn't work. So now the brain is going to try to conserve as much oxygen as it possibly can, so that then it can try to solve how do I get more oxygen. So the first thing the brain is going to do is it's going to begin to slow down the oxygen flow to things that it doesn't need right now. So for example, the brain doesn't really need advanced cognitive thinking right now. It doesn't need to remember algebra at the moment. And that might be upsetting to you because what might be causing the stress is that you had a big algebra test and the brain is concluding it doesn't really need math. And that's why people in stressful situations will make very simple mathematical errors. It's like 7 plus 4, 8. Okay. It also doesn't really need detailed memory. And so the memory becomes more difficult. We don't need an advanced vocabulary in this situation. And that's why we oftentimes have difficulty finding the words to say. Or if we're talking to somebody and they ask us a question, sometimes we have difficulty understanding it. Like if there's things that you're stressed about as a big history test and you look down, you read the question, you recognize that the words are English, but you have a lot of difficulty trying to figure out what is it they're asking. I mentioned before doing consulting work for human resource departments, and sometimes an interviewer will ask a question and the person being interviewed will give a great answer, but that wasn't what was asked. And the reason is because their vocabulary is affected by the stress they're under. It also doesn't, the brain knows it doesn't need muscle memory. Muscle memory isn't necessarily that important in that circumstance, and that's the reason somebody who makes 100 free throws in a row in practice, game's on the line and sometimes they miss the rim. Or a quarterback playing in a big game will throw the ball and it will go flying off completely different than what they intended to throw to. It's because they're relying on muscle memory, and the muscle memory is basically being interfered with or possibly even turned off. The brain knows it doesn't need fine motor skills. And that's the reason when we're in stressful situations, it's difficult for us to do things that are little micro things, minor, fine motor skills. It needs improved gross motor skills. So in stressful situations, your gross motor skills actually improve, because it might need that in a survival situation. When that's not enough, in other words, the brain still is losing oxygen, the next thing it's going to do is it identifies a bodily system that it doesn't need right now. And of course, it can't turn off the nervous system because then you die. Circulatory system, can't really turn that one off. The respiratory system would be ironic if it turned that off since it's trying to deal with a lack of oxygen. It doesn't really need digestion right now. So it slows the digestive system way down. And this is where you get things like dry mouth, butterflies in the tummy, nausea, etc. If that's not enough, in other words, it's still running an oxygen deficit, as a last-ditch thing, almost a last-ditch thing, the brain will begin to pull all the oxygen-rich blood to the core and to the head. The reason for that is because the brain can survive without your hands, your feet, your arms, and your legs. It doesn't want to lose those things. But if it loses the core and the head, it dies. So it pulls oxygen-rich blood to the core and to the head. And you begin to feel very flushed, very warm. Meanwhile, your hands and your feet are beginning to get cold. Now, because oxygen-rich blood is pulled away, you don't necessarily feel them as well. They begin to go a little bit numb. But if you take your hands in that situation, you put them to your head or to your core, it's shocking how cold your hands are and how warm or hot your head or core is. If that's not enough, the last thing, as a last-ditch effort, the brain shuts the body down and the person passes out. While unconscious, the brain restores a rhythmic breathing pattern to reoxygenate the blood, expel excess carbon dioxide, and that solves the oxygen deficit. Once the oxygen deficit is solved, it turns the body back on in reverse order. And that's the story. It's also the end of the story. So back to things that can be on the test now. So as you listen to that story, what was missing? What would you expect to play a prominent role in the story, and yet it wasn't even there? Of course, the answer is that the cause of physical stress has nothing to do with the communication event. The speech isn't what's causing your physical stress. Asking a person out on a big date, going in for a big job interview, talking to a person of authority, the big math test, whatever it is, isn't actually what caused it. What caused it was inadequate breath support. It was the brain's natural reaction to not getting enough oxygen and having too much carbon dioxide build up. So the solution to reverse this is rather easy. Now you'll notice at the end of the story, the way the brain reacted to now go back to a normal state, restore a rhythmic breathing pattern, reoxygenate the blood, expel excess carbon dioxide, and everything was okay. So the solution to these symptoms, rather than having the brain go all the way to the end there, is to start solving it now. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is breathing with your diaphragm, what we sometimes call diaphragmatic breathing. Now what I'd like you to do is put one hand on your upper chest, and you can't see down below, but one hand on your abdomen. And then breathe normally. Now as you inhale and exhale, I want you to make note of which hand is moving. Now if you put the hand on your chest on your lower chest, and you breathe, there's a good chance that it's going to move some because you're covering the lungs. But upper chest and abdomen or tummy, the one on the chest should not be moving as you breathe. The hand that's on your abdomen should be moving. If the hand that is on your chest is moving, what that means is that you're relying on your chest muscles to inhale and exhale. It makes sense why we would do that. Our chest muscles are the strongest muscle we have conscious control over. However, because our chest muscles are located above the lungs, using our chest muscles can only fill our lungs to approximately 1/3 of their capacity. Now, below the lungs is a very thin muscle membrane called the diaphragm, much weaker than the chest. However, because of where it's located, it can fill your lungs to full capacity. That means diaphragmatic breathing potentially can get you almost 1 or almost 3 times the amount of oxygen as breathing with your chest muscles can. Okay. You can breathe in almost 3 times as much oxygen as breathing with your chest muscles can, and expel an equivalent amount of carbon dioxide. Now, when you're sleeping, you breathe with your diaphragm naturally. Babies breathe with their diaphragm pretty much all the time. The reason that when we're awake, oftentimes we breathe with our chest muscles is because of the tension and stress we feel during the day. So the way to breathe with your diaphragm is to build a muscle memory. So that way when you breathe, you naturally breathe with your diaphragm. Now some people, like singers, theater, stage actors, because they have to project their voice and such, some athletes, they naturally build their diaphragm muscle memory up. And so when they breathe normally during the course of the day, they breathe with their diaphragm. They almost never use their chest muscles or rely heavily on their chest muscles to breathe. So how do you build this muscle memory? Simply through practice. So you can practice simply by putting a hand on your abdomen or a hand on your upper chest, and make sure that the only thing that's going in and out while you're breathing is your abdomen. If you put your hands behind your back and lift them up high in your back or on your head. When your hands are on your head or high up in your back, it stretches your chest muscles out so your chest muscles can't be used to breathe. And you just breathe normally and you're forced to breathe with your diaphragm. So these sorts of things help build muscle memory. They strengthen the diaphragm and it becomes natural to breathe with your diaphragm. Which again, breathe in 300 times, or excuse me, 300%, 3 times roughly as much oxygen and expels a lot of carbon dioxide. Now, if you're feeling physical stress, one technique you can use is something called 4x4 breathing. Some of you may have heard of this called square breathing, which is a perfectly fine name for it. I prefer the name 4x4 because the name actually says what you're doing. So the technique is using your diaphragm. You inhale through your nose for 4 seconds, pause, exhale through your mouth for 4 seconds, and then keep repeating. Okay, so what this is going to do is it's going to restore a rhythmic breathing pattern. Inhale, pause, exhale. Inhale, pause, exhale. And it's going to breathe in a lot of oxygen and then exhale a lot of carbon dioxide. Now, if you're really stressed, inhaling for 4 seconds is going to be almost impossible because your body's struggling getting oxygen. So just if you can only breathe in for 1.5 seconds, that's fine. Next breath, try to maybe do 2 seconds and just build up to where you can inhale for 4 seconds, pause for a moment, exhale for 4 seconds. And the physical symptoms that are caused by inadequate breath support should melt away. Okay, so I mentioned that this was probably going to be a long video, and it sure was. Thank you very much for being so patient and watching the video.